I stared at the invitation again, as if its glossy, embossed letters might betray some hidden instruction. They'd asked me to wear something clean but subtle. Translation: don't embarrass them. My in-laws, the Wickhams of Boston's Beacon Hill set, were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, and everything about that phrase felt loaded: clean, subtle, perfect. It was the polite way of telling me, Grayson Lowe, to keep my head down, my mouth shut, and my achievements unmentioned. I tightened the cuff of my white shirt as I read the invitation by the warm glow of my home office lamp, the hum of the city beyond the window a distant rumble. I could almost hear Franklin Wickham's heavy-lidded sigh as he greeted me at the door. Grayson, glad you could join us. My wife, Juliana, had rehearsed what to say. Just smile through it, babe. It means a lot to my dad. She pressed a gentle kiss to my temple that morning before I left for the office. Her hair smelled faintly of rosewater and something sweet, her mother's signature perfume, I suspected, and even her scent seemed calculated to reassure me. I nodded, hoping my stiff grin wouldn't betray the storm of nerves roiling inside. In the soft light of dawn, I'd felt the familiar churn, excitement at playing a part in her family's most dazzling event, laced with dread at being the odd man out. What they knew about me barely grazed the surface. I ran a modest logistics firm that delivered high-value shipments up and down the East Coast. To the Wickhams, I was a friendly but unremarkable businessman, a reliable son-in-law and provider of tasteful anecdotes about freight routes. Little did they suspect that the logistics brand was just a front, a way to stay invisible while I built something far bigger and private. I set the invitation down and crossed the room to my desk, where my laptop displayed the final details of tonight's announcement. Ascentium Capital, the firm I'd founded with a handful of trusted partners, was poised to acquire TechGuard AI for $80 million. It wasn't a rumor or a strategic leak. It was locked in legalese, bankers' signatures, and red-inked sleeves from our counsel. Tonight at 8:55 p.m. sharp, the press release would go live. The news ticker at Bloomberg would scroll across the bottom of the screen with my name in bold. Grayson Lowe makes shockwaves in tech finance. The irony tickled me. At a table glittering with old money and inherited titles, my name would land like a seismic tremor. I poured myself a measure of scotch from the crystal decanter on my credenza, the amber liquid catching the lamplight like a promise. Each drop felt like liquid courage. I raised the glass to the air, as if toasting an absent audience, then took a slow sip, just enough to steady the edge of anticipation, but not so much that I'd feel its warmth on my cheeks. I glanced at the antique clock on the wall. 6:20 p.m., 35 minutes until I had to leave for the Beacon Hill Club. Time enough to smooth my tie, slip on a navy blazer that concealed my watch, the one engraved with my late father's initials, and steel myself for a night of enforced humility. I checked my reflection in the mirrored closet door. Clean, subtle, unremarkable. Exactly what they wanted. But underneath that tailored facade pulsed the truth. I was a titan in the making, quietly acquiring companies and rewriting the rules of private equity. I imagined the scene. Halfway through Franklin's speech, just as someone raised a glass to his legacy, the muted television behind the bar flickering on to reveal my face in the breaking news banner. I could almost hear the collective gasp, the sharp intake of breath as their world tilted on its axis. Delilah would choke on her Chardonnay. Trent would drop his fork mid-bite. Celeste's smile would falter for the first time in decades. All because I chose to reveal my worth not with a boast, but with the measured authority of a headline. My phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Dorian, my executive assistant. Final press release scheduled for 8:55 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. All channels confirmed. I typed back a thumbs-up emoji. The simplicity of that reply felt criminally understated. In truth, my heart thrummed with the thrill of possession, of destiny seized and power claimed. I let my eyes wander to the framed photograph on my desk. Juliana and me at our wedding, sun-dappled and unaware of the battles to come. I loved her fiercely, but I'd never pretend to be smaller than I was. Tonight, she would see the breadth of what I'd built, and so would her family. I grabbed my blazer and draped it over my shoulders before slipping my arms into the sleeves. The fabric settled like armor. In the mirror's reflection, I straightened the lapels and touched the knot of my tie, ensuring it sat just so. Clean but subtle. Perfectly innocuous to the casual eye. I tucked the invitation into my jacket pocket and clipped on a sleek black wallet. Within it, a handful of business cards I never intended to use here. Instead, I carried the sharper weapon of surprise. As I headed toward the door, I paused to collect the invitation from where it lay by the lamp. My fingers brushed the raised lettering, Wickham 40th Anniversary, and I allowed myself a small, private grin. I would play the part they expected until the moment arrived to shatter their assumptions. Tonight, I wouldn't just attend the golden anniversary, I would redefine the evening, and perhaps the Wickham legacy itself, with one headline, with one revelation. The front door clicked shut behind me, and I stepped out into the cool spring air. The carriage lamps on our street glowed like watchful sentinels, and I made my way to the waiting car. Inside, I took a final breath, recalling Juliana's soft encouragement, "Just smile through it, babe." Only this time, my smile would hold secrets of seismic importance. The engine purred, and we rolled toward Beacon Hill. In the back of my mind, a single thought pulsed steadily. Let them think I'm small. They'll find out soon enough how big I really am. We arrived at the Beacon Hill Club just as dusk settled over Boston, its brick row houses glowing warm in the fading light. The carriage lanterns along the cobblestone drive winked like sentinels welcoming the city's elite into their vaulted wood-paneled sanctum. Juliana slipped her hand into mine as we emerged from the car, her fingers cool against my palm, and I could feel the tension in her shoulders as she squared her posture. She whispered, "Remember, small business guy." I nodded, smoothing the front of my blazer even though it sat perfectly. I let her guide me through the arched entry, past the marble busts and into the hushed foyer where silver-clad staff ushered us to the reception room. The grand salon was already alive with muted laughter and the tinkling of champagne flutes. Chandeliers dripped light onto the assembled guests, men in tuxedos and women in gowns that whispered secrets of family fun stretching back generations. Her father, Franklin Wickham, held court at the far end of the room, encircled by his cronies and business associates, pillars of Boston's financial establishment. I approached him with cautious deference, offering a steady smile. He acknowledged me with a nod so slight it might have been imagined, his gaze skimming my face as though searching for imperfections. "Grayson," he said, voice of velvet drawl tinged with polite boredom. "Still keeping your small business afloat?" His words hung between us like a gauntlet thrown down, and his arms remained folded, as if he expected me to bristle. I inclined my head. "Doing our best, sir." My voice was calm, measured. Next to him, Delilah, Juliana's older sister, painted her lips with a lazy grin that spelled amusement. She held out a crystal flute, the clear liquid shimmering in the lamplight. "Try our new vintage," she cooed, offering a sip of champagne so rare that it typically arrived by private import. "I assume you've never had anything quite like this." I raised the flute and took a small taste, enough to acknowledge gratitude without inviting further condescension. The champagne danced on my tongue, bright and acidic, and I concealed the pleasure it gave me. "Delicious," I said softly. She laughed, a high, tinkling sound that seemed to echo off the paneled walls. "Poor Grayson. You must be used to tap water by now." Laughter rippled around her circle, and I felt my cheeks tighten. I swallowed, pretending to find humor in the jest. Boston's old-money aristocracy thrived on these undercutting compliments, and I had learned to consume them without wince or retort. Meanwhile, Juliana's husband, Trent, drifted over, his chest puffed with pride as he brandished a Porsche key fob like a medal. He clicked the unlock button on it, and the tiny lights on the fob blinked back at me. "You know," he said, leaning in with that performative swagger he saved for special occasions, "my new Turbo S is practically a marvel of engineering. Makes logistics look quaint, don't you think?" He flashed perfect teeth. "If you ever need a ride, let me know." There was no real offer in his words, just another reminder of my perceived inferiority. I nodded, the corner of my mouth lifting in a polite, practiced smile. "Thank you, Trent. I'll keep that in mind." I sipped my champagne again, allowing the crisp bite to bolster my composure. Juliana glanced at me, her eyes apologetic. She mouthed a silent apology, and I squeezed her hand through the narrow space between us. I whispered, "It's fine." But inside I burned with the urge to remind them of their misplaced assumptions. Beneath the veneer of refined privilege, they had no idea whose kingdom I was constructing, nor the fate that awaited them at the dinner table. Instead, I let the polite silence stretch between us as Franklin turned away, heading toward the bar. I chose to follow him at a respectful distance, noticing the way the bartenders moved with precise choreography, decanting rare spirits and mixing bespoke cocktails for the married guests. The bar's mirrored back wall reflected the scene, rows of crystal bottles glinting behind slender columns. Franklin picked up a tumbler of scotch, swirling the amber liquid before lifting it to his lips. I approached the bar and ordered the same, specifying one of the rarer single malts. The bartender paused, surprised, but complied. I caught Franklin's eye in the reflection, and he arched an eyebrow as though he didn't recognize the order. I offered a slight bow. When he looked back at me, I said, "I have a taste for finer things." He merely nodded, as if he expected that to mean nothing at all. Throughout all this, Juliana stood by my side, her posture a careful blend of pride and apprehension. She had grown up on stories of her father's accomplishments, of the pedigree she'd inherited with her maiden name. Yet tonight, as she observed the underhanded barbs and the whispered judgments, I sensed a shift in her. Perhaps she was beginning to see the truth I'd long concealed, that I wasn't the meek husband they believed me to be. I met her gaze, my expression softening. She managed a tentative smile, and I raised my glass in silent solidarity. As the final guest filed into the adjacent dining room, a hush fell over the reception. Waiters in white gloves moved through the room, guiding people toward their assigned seats. Franklin paused at the threshold and swept his hand grandly. "After you, Grayson," he said, voice carrying a note of grudging courtesy. His words implied ownership, but I stepped forward without hesitation. I was prepared for the stage now. The spotlight awaited. We followed him into the candlelit dining hall, where long tables gleamed under the soft glow of crystal candelabras. Each place setting was impeccable: fine china, engraved silverware, linen napkins folded into perfect triangles. The backdrop was a tapestry of inherited wealth and generational pride. I took my seat at the head table, flanked by Delilah and Trent, Juliana nestling beside me. As I sat, I felt the weight of every dismissive glance and every condescending remark. Yet beneath that weight, a quiet confidence settled in my chest. They might see me as small potatoes tonight, but I held a secret power they hadn't reckoned with. I leaned into Juliana and murmured, "Watch closely." She glanced at me, her eyes reflecting a new spark of curiosity. Above us, the chandeliers trembled slightly as a waiter passed with the first course. The murmurs of the room rose again, setting the stage for Franklin's speech. And there, at that glittering table, surrounded by Boston's patrician elite, I prepared for my revelation, knowing that in a matter of minutes, their carefully curated world would tilt on its axis, and I would no longer be a footnote in their story, but the author of its next chapter. When the staff began to seat us at long, candlelit tables, the hush that swept through the dining room felt like a signal that the real performance was about to begin. Delicate paper napkins, monogrammed with the Wickham crest, were placed at each setting, an elegant reminder of inherited prestige, and, in my case, a painfully ironic one. I unfolded mine with deliberate care and laid it on my lap, suppressing the urge to crumple the symbol of their world into oblivion. The napkin's smooth, unblemished surface belied the razor-sharp barbs I knew would be sharpened by each course. In a room where every gesture was loaded with social currency, my silence would be perceived as weakness, yet I chose to remain still and watch. Our first course arrived, a single scallop nestled in a pool of saffron bisque, garnished with microgreens plucked from some exclusive estate's greenhouse. Delilah lifted her chin in a silent, bon appetit, and I followed suit, taking a small, respectful bite. The flavors were exquisite, and I allowed myself a brief moment of genuine appreciation before steeling my resolve. All around me, voices rose and fell in a carefully choreographed dance of compliments and backhanded remarks. My father-in-law's eyes never left the head of the table, where Franklin regaled his guests with anecdotes of his early days in Boston politics and law firm boards. Every word was a reminder of the empire he had built, one utterly disconnected from the quiet empire I was forging. Celeste, Juliana's mother, leaned forward to Delilah and whispered something that made her chuckle. Watching their parted lips and glinting eyeliner, I wondered if I'd ever learned what it felt like to be invisible at a gathering of underrepresented wealth. My life before Juliana had been far humbler, and I held those memories close, using them as the fuel for every bold move I made in the boardroom. Yet here, surrounded by crystal and caviar, I was the outsider status neatly packaged by my small business label. I touched my glass of water, its clear liquid a stark contrast to the refined wines paired with each course. I decided that tonight, I would let my silence speak louder than any retort or explanation. As the second course, a delicate quail breast atop a savory bread pudding, was served, Franklin's voice took on a more formal tone. He raised his glass of Bordeaux and offered a toast to the Wickham legacy, extolling decades of philanthropic efforts and steadfast leadership. The table erupted in polite applause, forks clinking against plates, and I joined in without hesitation. In that instant, I let them believe I accepted my place as a guest in their grand narrative. Only after the applause subsided did I lean toward Juliana and murmur, "They still don't see it." Her eyes flickered with both apprehension and admiration. I traced a line with my finger on the rim of my water glass. "They think respect comes from birth. They have yet to learn it's earned." I lifted my napkin as if to dab my mouth, and in that moment, I noticed the slightest smirk on Delilah's lips, a small crease that betrayed her satisfaction in the unspoken humiliation of others. I reminded myself that beneath her polished surface, she was as insecure as the rest of them, propped up by the illusion of superiority. My mind drifted for a fraction of a second to the Essentium press release that would break any minute. I let that thought settle like a quiet storm in my chest. The guests, oblivious to my secret, continued their wine-paired commentary on hedge fund returns, real estate fluctuations, and the latest college donations. They prided themselves on staying informed, yet they had failed to Google check me. That oversight would cost them dearly tonight. When the sommelier approached to refill my glass, I lifted my hand, halting him. "Please, just water for me," I said softly. His eyebrows rose imperceptibly, but he complied. The absence of wine on my table was another layer of camouflage. I would not appear too eager, too celebratory, or too different. I considered ordering another scotch after dinner, but decided against it. Tonight demanded clarity of mind and precision in every gesture. The meal continued. A sorbet palate cleanser, followed by a main course of beef tenderloin cooked medium rare, accompanied by truffle mashed potatoes and asparagus tips. Each bite was exquisite, but also inconsequential compared to the revelation to come. As the waiters cleared our plates, the room quieted in anticipation of Franklin's next remarks. I folded my napkin neatly and placed it to the left of my plate, exactly where the silverware guidelines dictated. I caught Juliana's eye again. She had stopped smiling, as though bracing for impact. A thin bead of sweat glittered at the corner of Delilah's brow, and I wondered if she sensed the impending storm. Trent, still clutching his Porsche key fob under the table, kept glancing in my direction, eager for any sign of weakness. In that moment, I felt a flicker of pity. They had spent their lives honing the art of superiority, yet none had mastered the art of humility that precedes genuine respect. Franklin cleared his throat, lifting his glass once more. "To family, to legacy, and to the traditions that bind us," he began. His voice held that familiar veneer of grandiloquence, yet something in his tone trembled, a subtle cracking around the edges of his confidence. As he spoke, I felt the pulse in my throat quicken. All that remained was the cue from the screens behind the bar, the moment when the truth would crest and break over the polished veneer of pretense. I straightened in my chair and leaned slightly forward, positioning myself so that every eye in the room, once captivated by Franklin's oration, would be drawn to me and the screens behind him. And then it happened. A collective shift, a murmur rippling through the crowd. Some guests turned toward the bar, where a muted television monitor flickered to life. The muted voice of the anchor was lost in the dining hall's acoustics, but the bold white text of the news banner loomed large. Essentium Capital acquires TechGuard AI for $80 million. CEO Grayson Low shocks finance world. Silence descended like snowfall. Napkins paused halfway to mouths. Forks hovered in midair. I sat motionless, letting the word low echo in the hush. Around me, Delilah's hand flew to her mouth, and Trent's eyes widened so far it was a wonder they didn't pop from their sockets. Celeste's gasp sounded loud enough to rattle crystal. Franklin's glass shattered on the table, sending shards glinting across the linen like fallen stars. The monogrammed napkins wilted in their holders, their pristine surfaces stained by the sudden spill of wine. I folded my hands, resting them calmly on the table. My heart pounded, but my expression remained perfectly composed. I allowed the silence to stretch, tasting its depth. The Whitcombs, who had so carefully crafted every detail of this evening, now found themselves spectators to a spectacle they hadn't orchestrated. When Franklin finally recovered, his voice was brittle. "Grayson," he said, as though naming a foregone conclusion, "care to explain?" I offered him a small, measured smile, tucking my napkin into my lap once more. "I'd be happy to," I replied. "But first, shall we finish dinner?" The tension broke like a wave, leaving in its wake a new order, one where paper napkins and paper cuts would be remembered not for their elegance, but for how they heralded the end of an illusion. They had a favorite tradition at Whitcomb gatherings, the junior associate joke. It arrived like clockwork as the third course was cleared and the sommelier introduced the next wine pairing. A delicate Pinot Noir from an exclusive Oregon vineyard no longer shy about its $200 price tag. Trent, Juliana's brother-in-law, leaned forward over his plate with that self-satisfied grin that only wealth and entitlement can carve. He tapped his wine glass lightly with a polished silver fork until the room fell quiet enough for him to deliver his punchline. "You know, Gray," he said, voice loud enough to carry across the linen tablecloth, "if this whole logistics thing doesn't pan out, you ought to think about a warehouse job. I hear they're hiring folks who don't mind getting their hands dirty." Laughter rippled from the nearest guests, some awkward, some gleeful, but it all landed squarely on my shoulders. I met Trent's gaze steadily, keeping my expression neutral as I lifted my glass of water and sipped. The Pinot Noir arrived in waves of burgundy, its aromas promising red fruits and earth, but I didn't touch it. Wine would betray nothing, but I preferred the clarity of water tonight. Juliana nudged my arm under the table, her eyes worried, but I pressed a finger to her wrist and shook my head slightly. I was ready. It was exactly the moment I'd been waiting for. "I've been spending more time on tech infrastructure and venture holdings lately," I said, my voice calm and measured, as though I were offering a status update rather than delivering a revelation. Trent's smile faltered. The table fell silent, pin-drop silence, save for the clink of a spoon against a dessert plate off to the side. All eyes swung to me as though I'd spoken on a megaphone. "Really?" Delilah's voice came from my left, incredulous. She nearly spat out a sip of her wine. "Investments? Grayson, that's cute." She laughed, but it sounded more brittle than before. My mother-in-law, Celeste, raised an eyebrow so high I feared it might detach and hover above her forehead. "My dear," she said, voice syrupy, "I simply assumed your small business was more of a boutique concern, something with a handful of trucks and office staff. I had no idea you were dabbling in venture capital." She paused, letting the words sink in like stones dropped into a still pond. How very ambitious. The taste of condescension was sweeter than the Pinot, but I did not discourage her tone. Franklin cleared his throat, fixing me with that gaze he reserved for staff-level missteps. "Grayson, I must confess," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "I respect ambition, but in my day, one built their reputation openly, through community boards, charitable foundations, political ties. You've been rather secretive about your ventures." He leaned back, folding his arms. "Why the cloak and dagger approach?" I allowed myself a patient smile and folded my hands in front of me. "While I appreciate the traditional path," I began, "I prefer results over appearances. Ascentium Capital was founded to identify underappreciated opportunities and cultivate them, away from the glare of hype. I find that a quieter approach yields stronger long-term performance." I paused, letting my words linger. The guests shifted in their seats, some leaning closer, others exchanging glances of confusion. "But if you'd like, I can share some details. We just completed an $80 million acquisition of TechGuard AI, your future-proofing through automated security protocols. That deal closes tonight." Delilah's fork clattered onto her plate, and she gasped. Trent pressed a hand to his chest as though I'd fired a pistol at him. Celeste's mouth dropped open in such an exaggerated display it would have been comical if not for the palpable tension that now throbbed in the chandelier-lit air. A ripple of astonishment spread down the table. Juliana's mother's social circle, endowed and entitled, were suddenly transfixed by the man they thought of as a benign accessory. Franklin's face turned a shade paler than the linen napkin tucked into his collar. He blinked, then cleared his throat roughly. "I see," he said, voice clipped. He glanced to the head waiter, who hurried forward with a tablet showing the evening's projected speeches and introductions. Franklin tapped the tablet screen as if checking a teleprompter. He looked up, eyes darting from the image of me on his screen to my face and back. "Well, that is impressive." His tone lacked conviction, but the words rose above the hum of the hall like an announcement. Juliana reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. "Grayson," she began, voice soft, but for once uncertain. She had believed in me, but she had never truly known the scale of what I'd accomplished. I squeezed her fingers. Would they have listened if I told them sooner? I whispered. She shook her head, tears gleaming at the edges of her lashes. "They wouldn't have," she admitted. I straightened, standing slowly so that all eyes followed my movement. The hush deepened. "You see," I said, projecting my voice so it carried across the length of the table, "I built Ascentium Capital to operate beneath the radar. While I respected your world, I didn't covet it. I focused on innovation, on acquiring companies like TechGuard AI that others overlooked, and nurturing them until they became market leaders. I paused, letting a smile play on my lips. Tonight, I thought it fitting to share this news with the family that, until now, believed I had neither the vision nor the means to do so. Franklin opened his mouth, then closed it, unsure whether to object or congratulate. Around us, the guests stirred, whispers rising like a tide. Someone at the far end of the table muttered, "He's ahead of the curve." Another approximated, "I never would have guessed." I surveyed the room, drinking in the faces that moments ago had dismissed me. Not one of them looked indifferent now. They were all enthralled. Delilah recovered first, her voice pitched with defiance. "Well, Mr. Capitalist, do you need help packing boxes for your warehouse if this whole finance thing doesn't work out?" She laughed weakly, trying to reclaim her former dominance. But her mirth snapped like a twig underfoot. I met her gaze evenly, unperturbed. "I think you'll find that logistics and venture capital require similar skills, strategic planning, risk assessment, and execution. The difference is, I ensure the payoffs outweigh the risks." Her laugh faltered, turning into a cough. Trent shifted in his seat, and Celeste's jaw clenched as she stared at her husband. Franklin cleared his throat again, louder this time, signaling the head waiter to dim the lights and prepare for the next phase of the evening. He swallowed and said, "Well, I suppose we'll have to amend the speeches. But first, let us finish our wine." He raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the candelabra glow. The guests obediently lifted theirs, the room breaking into polite, if strained, applause. I picked up my water glass and clinked it against Franklin's. "To new perspectives," I said. My words carried across the hall like the final note in a symphony, reverberating against imported marble and gold-framed portraits of Wickham ancestors. With that, the room's atmosphere had irrevocably changed. No longer was I the passive observer. They would watch me now, hungry for the next reveal. And I intended to give them just enough to keep them wanting more. As the lights brightened and the next course approached, I returned to my seat, settling into the rhythm of the evening's new order. The Whitcomb's tradition of humiliation had backfired spectacularly, turning their assumptions into the stage for my triumph. I glanced at Juliana, who met my gaze with a mixture of pride and awe. We both understood in that moment that respect earned in a room full of egos tasted different. Colder, sharper, and infinitely more satisfying. And as the future courses arrived, I tasted not the delicate sauces or fine wines, but the sweet vindication of having made them rethink everything they thought they knew about me. Franklin rose from his seat with an air of solemnity that demanded attention. The candles flickered across his silver hair, lending him the gravitas of a patriarch presiding over an age-old dynasty. He lifted his crystal glass of Chateau Margaux, the deep red liquid catching the warm glow of the candelabras above. "To 40 years," he began, voice steady and resonant, "of my beloved Celeste and me building this family, this legacy." Heads nodded in deference. Glasses chimed in unison, a ritualized celebration of tradition, permanence, and inherited prestige. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, waiting for the next flourish that would reaffirm the Wickham name in all its storied grandeur. As Franklin continued, recounting painstakingly selected milestones, his first law firm partnership, the founding of the Beacon Hill Trust, the grandchildren's latest triumphs, comfort settled into the assembled guests. They sipped wine, smiling indulgently at well-practiced anecdotes. The hum of classical music underpinned the speech, and the oak-paneled walls seemed to absorb each syllable like an archive of family lore. I watched from my seat, Juliana beside me, marveling at the ease with which Franklin commanded the room. Yet beneath his confident exterior, a subtle tremor betrayed the slightest crack in his composure. Perhaps he sensed the undercurrent of anticipation buzzing just beyond the polished veneer. At the bar behind us, the muted television screen flickered silently, unremarkable and easy to ignore amid the live performance unfolding at the head table. The bar itself was a masterpiece of old-world craftsmanship. Polished mahogany shelves lined with decanters of rare spirits, brass rails gleaming under the soft light. The bartenders, prime specimens of tuxedoed precision, moved in choreographed harmony as they prepared bespoke cocktails for the privileged few. Patrons rarely glanced toward the screen, absorbed as they were in the spoken legacy above them. But I kept my peripheral vision trained on that silent monitor, waiting for the moment I had orchestrated. Franklin reached the crescendo of his toast. "Here's to continuity," he declared, "to values passed down, and to the unbroken chain of success we will leave to our heirs." He paused, allowing the words to resonate. Laughter softly bubbled among those seated at the table. Comfortable laughter, the kind you grant to someone you've known your whole life. And then, without warning, the screen behind the bar shifted. The programming changed from an innocuous stock ticker to a breaking news graphic so sudden it felt like a cold gust of wind in summer. A scrolling banner appeared. Breaking news: Ascentium Capital acquires TechGuard AI for $80 million. CEO Grayson Lowe sends shockwaves through finance world. The transformation in the room was instantaneous. A collective intake of breath rippled through the guests as if someone had rung an invisible alarm bell. Forks hovered near mouths, wine glasses paused mid-air. Franklin's raised glass trembled, his eyes flicking toward the screen. The candle's flames danced erratically as if startled by the shift in atmosphere. At that moment, the ritual of tradition collided headlong with the unavoidable force of change. Guests turned in their chairs, craning necks to glimpse the announcement. Murmurs swelled into whispered questions. Is that? Did they say Grayson? Ascentium Capital? Phones emerged, dark screens lighting up as cameras captured the news banner. Juliana's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tight. I remained still, hands folded in my lap, allowing the astonishment to wash over the room. The flicker of the screen illuminated faces contorted in disbelief. Delilah's mouth hung open, Trent's jaw slack, Celeste's eyes wide and glassy. Franklin set down his glass with a clink that echoed like a starting pistol. He stepped off the dais and advanced toward the bar, his countenance shifting from composed patriarch to unsettled observer. I rose smoothly from my seat to join him, the room parting as though the announcement had opened a corridor. Franklin pointed at the screen, his voice unexpectedly rough. "Explain this, Grayson," he demanded, though his eyes lacked the certainty of a man accustomed to control. The question hovered in the charged silence, calling me forward. I approached the bar, each step resonating with purpose. The cameraman's lens had captured my face on the screen, calm, confident, unyielding. I glanced at Franklin, then addressed the room. "Yes," I said, voice clear and unwavering. "As of tonight, Ascentium Capital has officially acquired TechGuard AI for $80 million. I'll be serving as CEO." The simplicity of the statement belied its seismic impact. A charged hush fell, broken only by the soft click of a wine glass being set on a coaster. I offered Franklin a small nod of acknowledgement, bridging a silent chasm between inherited legacy and self-made triumph. Then came the cascade of reactions. Delilah's husband Trent coughed into his wine, splattering droplets like startled raindrops. Celeste's porcelain teacup trembled in her grasp, the liquid sloshing over the rim. Guests who had attended these anniversary dinners for decades found themselves leaning forward, drawn by curiosity and the thrill of witnessing a coup in real time. Franklin's associates exchanged glances, the imperious calm of the room giving way to the electric charge of the unexpected. Many uttered scattered congratulations, though their eyes betrayed the shock of being blindsided. Franklin steadied himself against the bar, turning back to me with a new expression, less paternal pride, more recognition tinged with wounded ego. You didn't mention any of this," he said slowly. "Not a word." His voice softened with an unfamiliar tone of humility, or perhaps incredulity. I met his gaze evenly. "I prefer to let actions speak louder than announcements," I replied. If I'd spoken of Ascentium's ambitions before the deal was closed, I would have risked jeopardizing the acquisition. Tonight was the first opportunity to present the facts. Each word was measured, precise, the embodiment of strategic restraint. Juliana slipped next to me, her head tilting in a silent question. I placed my hand gently on her shoulder. They would not have listened until they saw the proof. I whispered. She exhaled, tension melting from her shoulders. Around us, conversation resumed, tentative at first, strangers speaking in hushed tones, trying to process the upheaval in their familiar surroundings. Questions flew. What does this mean for the local market? Is this the start of a series of acquisitions? Grayson, where did you find the funding? Each inquiry was an invitation to recount the story of silent perseverance and visionary risk-taking that had defined my journey. Franklin cleared his throat. He raised his glass once more, this time to me. To Grayson Lowe, he announced, voice steady but softer than his earlier toast to legacy, for reminding us that progress often arrives unannounced. The words carried far more weight than any scripted tribute. Glasses clinked around the room in genuine celebration, an acknowledgement that the next chapter in the Whitcomb story included a new author. I lifted my glass, meeting Franklin's eyes with respect, the two worlds converging in a single toast. As the aftershocks of the announcement settled, I guided Juliana back to our seat. Our table, once a stage for subtle humiliation, had become the epicenter of intrigue and admiration. Guests leaned toward us, eager to learn more about the acquisition's ramifications. Offers of partnership and questions about board appointments replaced the earlier jests about warehouses. Delilah, cheeks flushed, managed a wry smile as she extended her glass. "Well played, Grayson," she admitted. Trent, still recovering from his surprise, straightened and said, "Let me know if you ever need a driver." Even Celeste, with eyes glistening, murmured, "I'm proud of you." I returned the smile that felt more triumphant than any trophy could provide. The television behind the bar flickered back to regular programming, but its impact remained etched in every face. The Wickham legacy had celebrated itself only to be overtaken by a revelation that redefined the evening's narrative. And as conversations buzzed with excitement and congratulations, I took my seat, ready to savor both the remaining courses and the knowledge that, from this moment on, I would no longer be underestimated. The moment Delilah choked on her Chardonnay, I knew the night had turned irrevocably. She lifted her glass amid sip, eyes widening as the crimson liquid cut across her throat. She gasped, coughing violently, her manicured fingers knocking the coupe to the tabletop. The wine sloshed onto the monogrammed napkin, seeping into the linen like spilled secrets. Celeste's hand flew to her heart, a gasp echoing through the hushed dining room. And at the head of the table, Franklin's face drained of color as though someone had siphoned warmth from his blood. I remained still, silent as the storm brewing around me. The television behind the bar, which had returned to its usual muted stock ticker, once more flickered with the aftermath of the breaking news. My headshot framed by the bolded banner announcing Ascentium Capital's $80 million acquisition of TechGuard AI. My calm smile stared back at me from the screen, an unspoken rebuke to the astonished faces in the room. Trent's fork clattered to his plate, clinking metal a staccato drumroll to the unveiling of my hidden identity. He stared across the table, lips parted, as though he feared I might vanish at any moment. Celeste leaned forward, her voice trembling. He's the CEO?" she whispered, as though the words might shatter under the weight of her disbelief. Delilah wiped tears from her eyes, tears of laughter, of shock, perhaps a mix of both, while clutching her napkin tightly in one hand. The guests around us murmured, glancing from their own screens to the spectacle unfolding at our table. The previously rigid decorum of the evening gave way to a current of restless energy. Even the sommelier paused mid-pour, wine swirling in the bottle as though suspended in time. Franklin cleared his throat, his composure cracking but not yet broken. He rose unsteadily, glasses of Bordeaux clinking in his hand. "Mr. Lowe," he said, voice firm despite his rattled demeanor. "Is there a reasonable explanation for this?" He gestured toward the television as if it had sprung from the earth without warning, yet he knew full well who was responsible. The plaque on his mantle held the name Whitcomb and Company. Tonight, it had been overshadowed by the quiet force of Ascentium Capital. I stood as well, shoulders squared beneath my charcoal blazer, and met his gaze with measured calm. Around us, the shifting shadows of candelabra flames danced across the polished table. I raised my water glass in a soft salute. The announcement was scheduled for 8:55 p.m. Eastern, I said evenly, and the time is precisely 8:56 p.m. My words sank into the charged silence, each syllable landing with quiet authority. I chose this moment so that my family could witness the culmination of years of work, rather than my boasting and idle conversation. Trent swallowed audibly, setting aside any pretense of superiority. Delilah's mouth worked as though she sought words, but found none. The television screen behind us switched back to its muted ticker, yet the banner remained etched in every mind. Franklin's voice wavered as he replied, "And you thought it wise to surprise us here, rather than confer privately?" He sounded wounded more than angry, as though my omission had been a personal betrayal. "I wanted to ensure the facts spoke for themselves," I answered. If I had mentioned Ascentium's ambitions to the family beforehand, it might have jeopardized the confidentiality clauses that made this acquisition possible. Tonight was the first opportunity to share the truth without risk. I paused, letting my answer settle. A tense hush followed, broken only by the soft scrape of silverware being reset at neighboring tables. The club's maitre d' hovered nearby, uncertain whether to clear the debris of broken glass or leave it as evidence of the evening's upheaval. Juliana pressed a gentle hand against my arm, her voice a whisper meant only for me. That was ruthless. She spoke not with reproach, but with the calculated precision of my reveal. I offered her a reassuring nod. Effective, I corrected quietly. She exhaled, relief mingling with pride in her eyes. She understood that in business, as in life, the element of surprise can be a powerful lever. Franklin ran a hand through his silver hair and steadied himself against the back of his chair. He squared his shoulders, as though gathering the remnants of his authority. "Well," he said slowly, measuring each word, "it seems I underestimated you." His tone lacked the warmth of apology, but it carried a grudging respect. Around him, the guests leaned in, eager for the next development. Franklin took a breath and addressed the entire room. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have been outmaneuvered, not by a rival firm, but by one of our own." His words, though understated, carried the weight of concession. A ripple of applause rose, tentative at first, then growing more confident as guests recognized the audacity of the move. "To Mr. Lowe," someone called, and a new blood in veteran halls. The gathering complied, their glasses raised in belated tribute to the man they'd overlooked until that very instant. I lifted my water glass, meeting their eyes with appreciation and perhaps, for a fleeting moment, a hint of vindication. As the broken champagne coupe was whisked away, the dining room's energy shifted. Conversations resumed, now infused with curiosity and admiration rather than condescension. Guests clustered near me, asking earnest questions. "How did you orchestrate this so seamlessly?" "And what's next for TechGuard AI?" Each inquiry was a testament to the power of perception and timing. No longer was I a footnote in the Wickham narrative. I had become the headline. Juliana leaned close as the music swelled softly in the background. "I'm proud of you," she said, voice thick with emotion. I reached across the table, brushing her cheek. "Thank you," I replied, knowing that the real victory lay not in the congratulations, but in the irrevocable shift of respect that now defined our place at this table. And as the murmurs of admiration washed over me, I understood that this moment, the wine glass drop, the stunned silence, the reluctant applause, would linger far longer than any vintage ever could. It was the precise fracture that signaled the end of doubt and the beginning of a new order, one in which I would never again be dismissed as just a small business owner. The room had hardly settled from the shock of the announcement when a subtle shift began to take shape around me. I'd watched the guests, who only moments before had smug smiles and upturned noses, now leaned forward with genuine interest. It felt like an earthquake, the moment traditions cracked and revealed the new landscape beneath. Franklin Whitcomb, once the undisputed monarch of this realm, was now a peer at my table, a reluctant one, perhaps, but still a peer. I sensed that change in the way his associates refrained from turning their backs on me and in the quiet apologies of those who joked about my little business. Tonight, I had become indispensable. I sat back and studied the tapestry of faces as conversation resumed around us. Delilah, her earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity, asked in a hushed tone, "So, tell me more about this acquisition. Was it difficult to negotiate under the radar?" Her question carried no scorn, only intrigue, and I recognized it as the first true outreach of respect. I clasped my hands together on the table and leaned in, lowering my voice to match the whispered confidentiality she had shown. "It required precision," I explained. "We structured the deal through a series of holding entities to maintain confidentiality, then moved swiftly once we had unanimous board approval. Timing was essential. Too early, and the target company's value could have skyrocketed. Too late, and competitors might have swooped in. We had a 6-week window to finalize everything." Her eyes widened, and she nodded appreciatively, as though noticing for the first time the skill behind the simplicity. Trent, now looking somewhat sheepish in the corner of my vision, cleared his throat and asked if Essentium was planning further acquisitions. I glanced at him, remembering his earlier remarks about warehouses, and offered a gracious smile. "We have several promising opportunities on the horizon," I said. "Our model focuses on emerging technologies, cybersecurity, clean energy, biotech. We're negotiating 2 more deals, though I can't get into specifics until they're closed." He nodded, his posture straightening. "I'd like to discuss potential partnerships," he said, voice earnest. "Perhaps I could introduce you to some contacts who might be interested in co-investing." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this turnaround. "I'd welcome the conversation," I replied, "provided the alignment of interest is clear and the vision is shared." His handshake that followed carried the weight of newfound respect rather than patronage. Juliana reached across and squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of our victory. Her smile was shy but triumphant, and I could feel the warmth of her pride. It was then that I realized the true power of tonight's revelation. I hadn't just earned the respect of my in-laws. I had reshaped their expectations and planted myself firmly at the center of their world. Where I had once been tolerated, I was now sought out. Where I had been underestimated, I was now invited to lead. It was a heady feeling, this transition from invisible observer to indispensable partner. Celeste caught my eye and beckoned me closer. She leaned forward, her voice soft. "Grayson, would you consider advising our family foundation?" she asked. "We're looking to expand our philanthropic portfolio into areas that champion innovation in underserved communities." Her request came with genuine enthusiasm, and I felt the full weight of her invitation to sit at the grown-up table, in both business and charity. I nodded, heart pounding with the significance of this moment. "I would be honored," I said. "It aligns perfectly with Essentium's commitment to social impact." As she excused herself to check the evening schedule, I realized that I'd just been granted access to a sphere of influence that had once been locked against me. The head waiter reappeared to clear our plates, signaling the end of the main course and the beginning of dessert. The delicate voice of the maitre d' announced a selection of imported cheeses and a triad of sorbets, but I hardly noticed the offerings. My mind buzzed with the possibilities now laid before me: board seats, co-investment opportunities, positions of advisory authority. Each represented a fresh avenue to expand my reach and fulfill the promise I'd made to myself years ago when Essentium was little more than a concept scribbled in a notebook. At that moment, I recognized that success wasn't just about profit margins and acquisition targets. It was about weaving oneself into the tapestry of influence, earning a permanent place at the table. Franklin returned to the head of the table, lifting his glass in a gesture that blended respect with concession. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I propose a revised toast, one that includes the newest member of our inner circle, Grayson Lowe." His voice carried firmness and warmth I hadn't heard before. Throughout the hall, glasses were raised again, but this time with genuine warmth toward me. I responded by lifting my water glass, and the soft clink against crystal symbolized a new concord between old money and self-made ambition. In that moment, I felt the boundaries of tradition stretch to accommodate innovation, and it was exhilarating. As the applause subsided, guests drifted closer to gather in small clusters around me, eager for a brief consultation, a snippet of advice, or a shared vision of future ventures. I answered each question with the same calm, measured confidence that had driven my ascent. No longer did I feel the weight of assumed inferiority. Instead, I stood at the center of a web of opportunity. The final notes of the evening string quartet began to fade, but the energy ignited at our table persisted, crackling like embers of potential. When the last of the guests took their leave, and the club's grand doors closed behind them, Juliana and I remained at the table, gathering our belongings. The remnants of spilled wine and scattered napkins bore silent witness to the transformation that had occurred. I wrapped an arm around Juliana's waist and leaned close, my voice low in her ear. "They didn't want me at the grown-up table," I said, "until they realized I built the table." She laughed softly, pressing her cheek against my shoulder. In the quiet aftermath, I understood that tonight had marked not just an acquisition of a company, but an acquisition of respect, opportunity, and a seed of genuine influence. And as we stepped into the cool Boston night, I knew that I would never again be a ghost at my own table. The room had flipped on its axis. Just hours ago, I'd been the polite fixture at the edge of the table, nodding in deference as the Whitcombs recited their family lore. Now the same voices clamored for my insight, eager for even a scrap of expertise. I sat back in my chair, savoring the shift as Franklin leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes bright with curiosity. "So tell me," he said, voice warm, "how do you see AI reshaping our security infrastructure over the next decade?" His question felt like a recognition more valuable than any toast, an open invitation to share my vision. I tapped the rim of my water glass thoughtfully. "We're entering an era where threat detection must be predictive rather than reactive," I began, choosing each word deliberately. By integrating advanced machine learning algorithms with real-time data feeds, from IT devices to cloud-based logs, we can anticipate vulnerabilities before they're exploited. TechGuard AI's proprietary framework uses federated learning to train models across decentralized networks, ensuring privacy and scalability. In practical terms, that means reducing breach response times from hours to minutes, and potentially preventing losses in the millions. Murmurs of approval rippled around the table. Delilah leaned in, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's fascinating," she said, a genuine smile lighting her features. "I always thought of AI as something abstract. But this is concrete, measurable impact. Trent, ever the numbers guy, tapped his phone, pulling up financial projections. "What kind of ROI can we expect in the first year post-acquisition?" he asked. I offered a confident nod. Conservatively, 30 to 50%, depending on deployment scale and integration speed. Remember, this isn't just about software. It's about reshaping organizational culture around proactive security. Juliana reached across, her fingers brushing mine. I caught her eye and saw pride softened by relief. She believed in me all along, but tonight was the night the world did too. Beyond the table, other guests drifted over, drawn by the magnetism of my quiet authority. A board member of the Family Foundation murmured, "I'd like to discuss grants for AI education programs." A hedge fund manager proposed pairing TechGuard's algorithms with his firm's trading infrastructure to detect fraud. Each overture reinforced the fact that respect earned in a room full of egos tastes different, cleaner, crisper, almost cold in its precision. As the dessert course arrived, petite dark chocolate tarts with a smear of gold leaf, I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the cool rush of vindication. I had orchestrated this evening with meticulous care. The timing of the announcement, the restraint in my demeanor, the deliberate reveal that reframed every assumption. But as gratifying as the applause was, the true triumph lay in being taken seriously. Not as an afterthought, but as a peer whose expertise commanded attention. Franklin cleared his throat, raising his glass once more in a gesture of unspoken alliance. "To Grayson Lowe," he declared, "for reminding us that leadership can spring from anywhere, including the most underestimated corners." The toast echoed around the hall, and I lifted my glass in response, savoring the resonance of those words. It was more than a gesture, it was a precedent. When the gathering finally began to break up, I found myself surrounded by invitations to join advisory boards, to co-host strategic dinners, to speak at upcoming symposiums. Each invitation was a testament to the power of perception when aligned with substance. I traded business cards, no longer discreetly taped and hidden, but presented openly, proudly bearing the Essentium insignia. Juliana slipped her arm through mine as we prepared to leave. "They don't know what hit them," she murmured with a playful smile. I returned her grin. "They know now," I replied softly. Outside, the night air felt cool against my face, the city lights shimmering on wet pavements. The car awaited, engine humming expectantly. We climbed in, and as we pulled away, I looked back at the club's grand facade. Behind its stately doors, a legacy had been both honored and upended. On the drive home, Juliana rested her head on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. I placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Thank you," I said, "for believing in me when they wouldn't." The road stretched ahead, illuminated by streetlights that flickered like possibilities. Tonight had taught me that respect unasked for is respect unrealized, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is reveal your worth in a moment they'll never forget. And so, as the city skyline receded in the distance, I permitted myself a moment of quiet triumph. The Whitcombs had learned a lesson in perception and power. A lesson I intended to carry forward, long after the silver flutes had been stowed and the candles extinguished. Because now, I was no longer invisible. I was indispensable, and the world, at last, had taken notice. The evening's momentum carried us to the valet stand, where the polished chrome of countless luxury cars gleamed under the canopy lights. Juliana's arm was draped through mine, her posture relaxed for the first time since we'd walked through those grand doors. She glanced up at me, eyes soft with a mixture of admiration and hesitance. Before either of us could speak, Franklin swept toward us, his tailored navy suit impeccably cut yet somehow weighed down by the evening's revelations. He cleared his throat, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate smoothness. "Grayson," he began, voice unsteady but determined, "I owe you an apology." I met his gaze without triumph, offering a calm nod. He inhaled, as if gauging the right words. "I misjudged you. I assumed you were content to remain in the background. Tonight, you taught me that dignity isn't worn like a badge, it's earned." He paused, glancing at Juliana before returning to me. "Please accept this invitation to our family's investment retreat next month in Cape Cod. I'd like you to lead a session on emerging markets." His offer hung between us, an olive branch in Armani, expensive yet earnest. Juliana's lips curved into a tentative smile as she let go of my arm to slip her hand into mine, grounding me. I saw in her expression the unspoken question, would accepting this overture invite me back into a world that had tried to diminish me? I studied Franklin's face, noting the subtle lines etched deeper by the night's events and the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. After a moment's consideration, I extended my hand. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I appreciate the invitation, but my schedule is dictated by Essentium's board calendar. Perhaps I can contribute remotely. Prepare a virtual presentation in advance." I offered a compromise that balanced respect with self-possession. Franklin hesitated, then nodded, relief blooming where tension had reigned. "That would be perfect," he agreed. "Your perspective will carry far beyond any boardroom." Celeste stepped forward, offering me a slender champagne flute she'd retrieved from a passing server. "To new beginnings," she said, voice warm and genuine. I raised the glass, acknowledging her gesture. Around us, valet attendants began to move, doors opening and closing, engines purring as guests retrieved their vehicles. The night air swirled with perfume and exhaust, a heady blend that left my senses alight. Juliana rested her head against my shoulder as I slipped my arm around her waist. "You handled that beautifully," she whispered. I pressed a kiss to her temple. "We're establishing new terms," I replied. "They're apologizing in Armani. I'm responding in Essentium." Her laughter, soft and relieved, was the sweetest sound of the night. The valet handed me the keys to our car, a sleek, understated electric model that contrasted sharply with the gas-guzzling status symbols around us. As we slid into the back seat, I felt the final vestiges of that gilded dinner loosen their grip. Outside, Beacon Hill's lampposts glowed against the damp pavement, guiding us back to the world we'd built together, one where respect wasn't demanded, but quietly commanded. And as the sedan pulled away, I looked back at the Whitcomb lines of townhouses, knowing that in their hearts and in their family vaults, I'd secured a place far more valuable than any legacy could ever guarantee. The first light of dawn filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse office, casting long shadows across the expanse of glass and steel. I stood at the granite countertop, coffee warming my hands, and watched the sunrise gild the city skyline. The echoes of last night's triumph still vibrated through me. Broken assumptions, shattered silences, the sudden pivot from underestimation to indispensability. Yet even as the adrenaline faded, I knew that the most powerful moment was yet to come. The phone call they never expected. My phone lay on the desk, screen dark but vibrating insistently. 2 voicemails from Franklin Whitcomb, a string of texts from Juliana, and a notification from CNBC indicating a feature story. I let the coffee steam rise around me before pressing the playback button on Franklin's first message. His voice, measured and sincere, filled the room. "Grayson, last night was unexpected. I'd like to discuss our family's strategic interests and explore further collaboration. Please call when you're free." I smiled, recalling the polished resolve in his eyes at the valet stand. He believed he was reaching out in humility, but I recognized the subtle shift in power. I replayed the second message. "I've briefed our board on Essentium's model, and they're intrigued. Let's set up a meeting at your earliest convenience." His tone was gracious, but it carried the undercurrent of necessity. They needed my expertise now, not merely as a courtesy, but as an anchor for their future endeavors. I set the phone aside and turned to the skyline, bracing myself for the broader ripples of last night's revelation. My assistant, Dorian, knocked and entered, tablet in hand. "Morning, sir," he said. "Harvard Business Review wants an interview for a cover story, and your calendar is clear for the next 2 weeks. Also, Franklin's office has requested a video conference tomorrow at 10. He paused, his eyes reflecting both respect and anticipation. "Shall I confirm?" I folded my arms over my chest, savoring the moment. "Yes," I replied. "Confirm all of it, and schedule an evening flight to Tokyo for our board meeting next week." Dorian nodded and left me alone with the view. I took a deep breath, centering myself. It was too early to feel triumphant, but the sense of vindication lingered. The world had finally begun to see me as I was, not just Juliana's husband, not merely the owner of a modest logistics firm, but the visionary founder of Essentium Capital. My ambition had always been quiet, deliberate, but not unnoticed. My phone buzzed again, this time Juliana's text. "Can we have breakfast before you leave? I have something for you." I felt a warmth in my chest. Even amid the corporate whirlwind, she stayed grounded in the personal moment. I typed back, "Absolutely. Meet me in the lobby at 8:30. Then I opened the CNBC feature. My story framed as the mystery founder who flipped Boston's old money. The headline was bold, the portrait more bold still, capturing my calm expression beneath the glare of opportunity. I leaned back, absorbing the words that charted my journey from concealed investor to headline maker. The door opened, and Juliana slipped into the room, carrying 2 cups of cappuccino. She set one beside me, the scent of espresso and foam mingling with the faint aroma of leather-bound contracts. "You looked like you could use this," she said softly. I reached for her hand. "Thank you," I replied. She perched on the edge of my desk and studied my face. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern threading her voice. I nodded, meeting her gaze. "More than okay," I said. "I'm exactly where I want to be." Her smile was a gentle sunrise, and I realized that success tasted sweeter when shared. I took a sip of coffee, letting its warmth spread through me. "I'll call your dad today," I said. "Tell him I appreciate the invitation and look forward to working together." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "He still hasn't forgiven himself for underestimating you," she murmured. I chuckled. "That's fine. I've long forgiven him. Now we build together." By the time I slipped into my tailored blazer and prepared to leave, the city had come fully awake. Below, traffic hummed. Street vendors arranged their morning stalls, and the hum of ambition thrummed through every block. At the elevator doors, Dorian joined me. "All set?" he asked. I nodded. "Let's go." As we descended, I took one last look at the digital ticker outside the office, Essentium Capital up 10% after yesterday's announcement. The numbers glowed green, symbols of confidence and momentum. I felt a steady surge of purpose. Last night had been a defining moment, but today marked the real beginning, the day I turned silent power into lasting influence. The lobby was bright with morning light, and Juliana was waiting with that look of unwavering faith. I took her hand, and together we stepped out into the rhythm of the city, ready for the calls, the meetings, the interviews, and the uncharted opportunities that lay ahead. The Whitcomb's world had expanded to include me. Now it was time for mine to do the same.